Welcome back to the Perrick Project. Let me tell you a very strange story. Hillel once saw a skull floating on the water, and he said to it, "Because you drowned others, they drowned you, and eventually those who drowned you will be drowned." Wow! At first glance, it seems so judgmental. How does he know? So here's what really happened. Hillel saw this skull and he recognized that it was someone who was a known murderer, and he used it to explain that there is divine justice in this world. He said, because you murdered others, you were murdered. But just in case anyone would think that those who murdered the murderer are going to get away with it, he said, no, there is divine justice in this world, and those who murdered you, the skull, the known murderer, they will be punished too. That the way we treat others is the way that God treats us. God treats us measure for measure. Any suffering that we inflict on others comes back to haunt us. And of course, any good deed that we do for others benefits us. Incidentally, we're told that this is why we should develop the trait of being easy to forgive others. Because a person who forgives others easily, God will treat them likewise. And if they have any misdemeanors, which some of us may have some, then God will forgive them easily. So now that we have established that there is divine justice in this world and that no deed goes unanswered, in the next Mishnah, Mishnah 8, Hillel is going to evaluate the different stages of life and different pathways of happiness, and which ones will take us there and which ones will derail us. We're going to see that too much of anything is not good for us, except for when it's an indulgence in Torah study and in charity. So he begins with the first stage of life, and he tells us in quite graphic words, the more flesh, the more worms. From a very young age, we have a desire to eat and to drink. But as we all know, that overindulgence in food or drink, even in healthy food or drink, is not good. It causes ill health, and in the long term, it's a painful reminder for us of not having focused on our spirituality. As we grow older and a bit more sophisticated, we have a desire for money, for property, for possessions, and he tells us, the more possessions, the more worry, because nothing is guaranteed. Property can be stolen, it can lose its value. So when someone has more stuff, what they're really having is more things to worry about. So while we may think that accumulating stuff, retail therapy, is going to give us happiness, he's reminding us that the more stuff we have, the more things we have to worry about. And then he continues and he says, the more wives, the more witchcraft. And he was talking about a time when polygamy was allowed. And when there was more than one wife, they could resort even to witchcraft in order to gain their husband's approval. And as a person matures, the need for possessions may be replaced by a need for prestige. And they may be tempted to hire a lot of maidservants. And he's saying the more maidservants, the more immorality. What does he mean here? He means that if someone surrounds themselves with maidservants, they may have too much free time, and that having too much free time is not a good thing. It can lead a person to immorality. In fact, the Talmud says that even if someone can afford household help, they shouldn't hire household help to do every single thing, because too much free time is not a good thing. Again, he's warning us here in all these things about excess, about having too much of these things. And then he tells us that the more servants a person has, the more thievery, because if someone employs staff above what they can afford, again he's talking about excess here, they may bring themselves to questionable business practices in order to maintain their lifestyle that's above and beyond what they can afford. At first glance, when we look at it, all these excesses, and it's so easy when we see someone else with living that sort of lifestyle to look and think, oh, if only. But he's reminding us that these are not the pathway to happiness and success. So if this is not the pathway, what is the pathway? Don't worry, he's not going to leave us hanging as to what is the pathway to happiness. The more Torah, the more life. He's reminding us that someone who plugs into Torah, not only do they have the joy of living a meaningful life, but they are plugging into eternity, because our soul lives on, and a soul that's tapped into Torah lives on for eternity. And the more study, the more wisdom. He's reminding us what the Koreans discovered is that through studying Torah, we develop our skills, which is why they study Talmud, not because they want to understand Judaism, but because they understand that it develops the mind. In fact, I remember when I was studying with a dear friend in Vancouver, she would look at what we were learning and she would say, wow, my husband's a psychologist and he knows that, but she couldn't believe that everything that her husband had spent years and years and years studying in school for, we were learning from the Torah. And he continues and he tells us the more one seeks advice, the more one has understanding, which is a reminder that when we are in a situation, we have a very narrow perspective, and the more we can open ourselves up and ask people for advice, the more we widen ourselves, and the more we can then make a good decision. And he continues and he says, the more charity, the more peace. In fact, there's an interesting Jewish law that if someone has a certain amount of charity to give, that it's better to give smaller amounts to more people than to give that one amount to one person. Why? Now there's two reasons. Firstly, because every time you give, you're overcoming your resistance to be giving, and you become a little bit more of a giver. And there's another reason, because when we give a little bit to a lot of people, we're creating peace amongst the people. And this is what he's telling us, that the more charity, the more peace we create. So this pathway of indulging, so to speak, in Torah and studying and being humble enough to ask advice and being charitable is one that earns us a good reputation. And he tells us that a good reputation lasts forever, unlike the first few things that we looked at, which are temporary and fraught with worry. A good reputation lasts forever, and a person who acquires Torah acquires eternity for their soul. And while we looked at so many things, the beautiful thing of what we just learned is that it's for eternity. So if we acquire even one small thing and we incorporate it into our life a little bit more, we have that for eternity. Thank you for listening.